Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Boys in the Cave. My name is Tanza. I'm joined by my co-host Ramit and joined by a very special guest today. We're actually at the Twins of Faith conference and we've been honored to be invited and have a discussion with a special guest, Shaykh Yahya Ibrahim. So, Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hope you're doing well, inshallah.
Allah yakrimak, alhamdulillah. Likewise for you, ya Rabb.
Alhamdulillah. Is this your first time in Sydney?
No, I've come a few times, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. How's it like compared to Perth? I know I got a few friends at Perth I've met through work, and they say that Perth is way more relaxed and chill compared to...
Absolutely, yes. It's West Coast lifestyle. Yeah, very much.
Is it less traffic too?
Absolutely, yes, alhamdulillah.
Is it less fast in Sydney?
You get the ups and downs. There's certain things that you would have here, for example, that we don't have over there. But I think on the whole, being a Perthian is
Perthian.
Yeah. I think it's a great advantage. You should shift over there, inshallah.
I've never actually ever been to the west side of Australia, ever.
Yeah.
I've only been to Melbourne, Gold Coast, Brisbane, Sydney. That's it. Never been anywhere.
It's probably better that you guys stay here. Leave it to us the way it is. Alhamdulillah.
Sheikh, actually, I think from my perspective, and I was having a chat with Rahmat last night about this, is that, alhamdulillah, like you're very inspirational with all the work you're doing online, with the dawah work and with your own efforts in Perth. But at the same time, there's this other dimension that doesn't get talked about probably as enough, or I haven't seen it online about yourself, is that you've actually, subhanAllah, like very inspirational in the sense that I think maybe a decade ago, mashallah, I think you went through like a weight loss transformation to now.
Oh, it hasn't been that long, but yeah, recently. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, where it became more public, I guess you could see the effect. Yeah.
Because like, I guess from our perspective, I get... when I was growing up, and I'm not demeaning sheikhs, but you just get this impression that, you know, they don't I don't know, a sheikh that is overweight is like your standard sheikh. You get what I mean?
Mm.
And I think at this nowadays we see like a complete like twist on that. I've seen many sheikhs that are actually gymming. I've seen them hustling with the work ethic and all that. And subhanAllah, like, I think you're breaking those like those stereotypes as well in the community, and mashallah, but at the same time you actually transform from one, you know, aspect to another. So what's your sort of advice for people that might, you know, are going through that? I know Ramit was talking to me about your
really
transformation
nothing.
is
it's really nothing.
But like he was talking about how he lost 8 kilos or something. I'm like, alhamdulillah, that's a good effort, but not compared to the sheikh, bro.
No, alhamdulillah, tabarakallah.
But any advice you sort of have, because that's very inspirational, and that's like, I think even from a spiritual lens, because I do want to touch on spirituality today, is that it's like breaking the nafs.
Like well, he shared,
you've lived in a certain way your whole life, and you're able to go against your nafs every day, be it, you know, through eating less or eating the right food, to gymming or exercising. It's a nafs, like it's breaking the nafs, and you can go into spirituality.
Like he shared some photos, and wallah, like last time I saw you in 2015, I couldn't even recognize you.
Yeah. Allahumma barak, alhamdulillah. I think what it is a lot of people ask, how did you do it? It's the wrong question. It's more about why.
SubhanAllah, it's deep.
So when you... it's not, I don't want to limit it just to weight loss. I'd rather make it about wellness. So if there's anything you're unwell in, and if there's anything that you need to change, you need to discover why you need to make that change. And unless you come to terms personally with why, there's no incentive to change. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always takes that very personal approach with us. And when we turn to Allah, it's always Rabbi, my Lord. It's almost a coveting kind of statement where it's exclusivity. So if you can discover the why, what's the purpose behind it, then it's innamal a'malu binniyat. Then your action will reflect that purpose-driven goal. I don't like the word intention for niyyah. It's a goal that has a purpose. So that's really the concept of niyyah in the classical sense. So once you have your niyyah set, then the actions you will perform become easier. So being able to take preventative measures, for some people it's necessary that they have people who intervene medically. For some people, it's they need a team behind it, which was something that I needed. I needed people who would speak to me from a psychology perspective, people who would help from a dietitian perspective, fitness experts, and so on and so forth. But all of that would not matter if you didn't know why you're doing it and what is the reason that you're doing it. So that becomes the first most important thing. It's how they say you have to admit the problem.
Right.
You have to know, oh, look, I'm the problem. I'm the one that needs to make the change.
SubhanAllah. What's your take on that, Rahmat? Because I know you've gone through more.
Yeah, it was like. I sort of come from the same sort of place. Like I just wasn't really comfortable in myself either.
Yeah, so you made a decision.
You make a decision, really. You just get in touch with the right people, and I think that's when you have the why right. That's when that really drives you.
Absolutely.
Like all the house stuff that will come later, like diet and talking to the right people. Being
because everybody will have a different route. And when people say, "What did you do?" That it's almost as if they're thinking, "What you did, I'll do."
Yeah.
But everybody has a different
Everyone's
lifestyle,
different, right?
different food that they like, different time constraints. My schedule and your schedule won't ever be the same. So what I do and what I eat and when is not going to be of benefit to you. But what will be is thinking about why.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. I also wanted to touch on, I know you do a lot of works with family reconciliation, a lot of that kind of stuff. So I don't know if me and Rahman are the best person to be speaking about this because none of us are married. But but at the same time, we can always empathize from our kind of lived experiences as well. But it would be great to kind of get your experiences because I feel that in this day and age, we have this, what can I say? I feel that people kind of use Islam and then mix it with modern society and are confused with how to become a practicing Muslim and shape the family unit and go about life in this day and age. So it becomes a big cesspool, I guess, of confusion. What's your take on that in general? Have you found that with Muslim families going about society or people specifically in the West, perhaps?
I think there are really important principles that we have, not just as Muslims, but just as human beings in general. First, we shouldn't over-grandize the problems that we have. I think one of the bigger problems that pulls people apart is they make a mountain out of a mole. It's a crumb, but it's just so exaggerated. It's pushed into that degree. I think the second thing is sometimes we assume that if I chose well, then everything must be right. And, I chose this person, we were so in love and, we talked for so many hours before we got married. And all of a sudden now we're married and we have one child and it's not working out. So it's almost you get phased. Well, why? Why did this happen? Right? The third perspective is the haram limits the enjoyment of the halal. So whenever a person does haram, whether it's men indulging in pornography or, women gossiping and a materialistic kind of sense and, sexualizing everything, all of those kind of things, they take away of the barakah of the relationship. And all of that kind of erodes it. Leave all that, and then you got to talk about in-laws and, the meddling of the in-laws and the meddling of your best friend or your girlfriend or whoever it is that's going to add their advice or give you unsolicited, what they term as nasiha, which in fact isn't nasiha, but really home wrecking. So all of those kind of things come together to create the perfect storm. Leave all of that and then look at some of the media that we're bombarded with where, How I Met Your Mother. It's actually more about how many people met your mother before me, right? That kind of thing. The kind of music that is filling the ears, the movies that we watch. You can almost think of every romantic scene. Two people meet at a bar, they sit down, they have a drink, which is really a drug that lowers their inhibitions, lower their faculty of making critical decisions, and it's okay to make that mistake and just get along and go on to the next guy or go on to the next girl. So all of that is kind of absorbed with us, even as Muslims, where it's really not what our faith-based practice recommends. So all of that is kind of absorbed within us, but we don't really know how to reflect it and react to it. So having a positive relationship needs to be studied and learned. So I always recommend to people to actually go out and do a pre-marriage course and to learn what are the rights and obligations that they are owed, but more importantly, what they should be fulfilling to others. What does it mean to be a man as being different to being a male, What's the difference between being a righteous woman and just being, what's the difference between being a lady and a woman? Those are really important criteria for us as Muslims.
SubhanAllah. I think there was a lot of great stuff that you touched on. We do want to go deep into it. One thing I do want to add though is I remember, because I'm from subcontinent Bangladeshi background, Bollywood movies are championed, and because me and Rami are Bangladeshi, so literally grow up, you're in tune with these Bollywood movies, and the way they see it is like they have to like run away from society because they love someone, and they're able to marry that someone, and it's happily ever after, and they have all these trials and tribulations, but they don't show the after of what happens. It skews our mental, because we grew up thinking, like, from a psychological perspective, thinking, okay, and this is how it looks. That was
something I was going to correct. Initially, when you led into this piece, you spoke about Western. But actually, we have the same problems in Eastern, African, Arabic. It's globalized. It's not a Western construct. It's the same construct anywhere.
It's interesting how you mentioned psychological, and like we grew up watching it, and when we get filled with movies and music, and you grow up, you actually see it being people living it in their own lives, people dating, and when they have weddings, they do it exactly the same way they do in the movies.
Well, they kind of try to mimic it, right?
Exactly, right? Yeah. So it's just sort of interesting to see how, true and real it is that when you grow up watching these sorts of movies in that culture, how you actually translate it into your life as well. But like, you call that stuff out to your parents and family and relatives, and they're just like, what are you talking about? This is the normal way to do it. And
on the one hand, it is normal in a sense, because it is what everybody else is doing. And we have a term for that in the Sharia. It's called umum al-balwa, where the trauma has become so widespread that it's a norm. So it's something that's very normal, that everybody kind of has the same expectations of what dowry should be and what a wedding should look like, and all of those kind of things. And certainly, as Muslims, we're not meant to go against the grain in that which isn't condemnable in our faith. So there are certain things within cultures, Western culture, Eastern culture, whatever culture that you look at, that are not Islamic principles, but they don't go against the grain of Islamic principles. And those are things that are permitted to be embraced and permitted to be enjoyed. But
like things like food, would you say?
Yeah, so food, even the after parties, even, the henna party that the girl will have with her, with her girlfriends and those kind of things. As long as it doesn't go to the excesses that is condemnable, it should be embraced. And the Prophet ﷺ would comment to the women of Medina about somebody getting married, have you not declared it? Haven't you given her a celebration, right? So those were things that were norms at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They're not religious observances, but they were cultural practices. Right. And one of the things that I think needs to be made clear, that the cultural tensions were always there, even at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So the people from Mecca were very different to the people of Medina. The Muhajirin were very different to the Ansar. In the hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, which is in Bukhari, he begins a hadith by saying, Kunna ahla Mecca, the people of Mecca, nasudu nisa'ana, we used to be the ones who overruled our women. So if I said to my wife, do something, she would just do it, because that's how she grew up. Your husband tells you to do something, do it. It wasn't an Islamic thing, it's just how Meccan culture was. فَلَمَّا هَاجَرْنَا إِلَى الْمَدِينَةِ إِذَا نِسَاءُ الْأَنصَارِ يَسُدْنَ رِجَالَهُم. We found that the women of the Ansar were the masters of their men. They were the sayyid of their men. So the wife would say to her husband, hey, can you do this? And her husband would say, yes. And that was just the Medina culture compared to Mecca. So when we made hijrah, Umar is complaining. He says, فَلَمَّا هَاجَرْنَا تَعَلَّمْنَا الْمُهَاجِرَاتِ مِنْ أَخَوَاتِهِنَّ الْأَنصَارِ. The women of Mecca began to take ta'aleem, lessons, from the women of the Ansar. So one day, Umar, Umar, right? That guy. He goes, one day, I asked my wife to do that. فَرَجَعَتْنِي. She pushed it back at me. She returned it to me. She goes, no, you go do it. فغضبت. I was like furious. What's happening? You guys are taking on these characteristics, this culture of the people of Medina, which is totally different to our culture. So it wasn't about an Islamic issue. So he said, I irtadaytu thiyabi, I put on my clothes. I went to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning the house of his daughter, Hafsa, radiallahu anha, because that's where the Prophet was that night. And he says, as I came close to his house, I could hear his wife responding back to him. So I said, whoa, like even in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, this is what's occurred. So that shows you that you will definitely absorb culture. And one of the bigger friction points, of course, is that you will find that we try to live our Bengali or Egyptian or Lebanese or Turkish or Japanese culture in a Australian context in the same way that it's back home. And then we have those problems where there's that touch and friction.
You mentioned earlier about the difference between what's a male and what's the other?
Man.
Man, right.
Yeah.
Well, how would you define both?
So obviously we don't have enough time, but what I'll refer you to is, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Yaqeen Institute.
Yeah. MashaAllah, doing great work.
Yeah, mashallah. And the team over there does wonderful work. So there was a genders relations article series. Myself and sheikhs and sheikhas all contributed to it. Dr. Jonathan Brown, Sheikha Tamara Gray, myself, and a few others, mashallah, contributed to it. And I wrote something called Prophetic Masculinity. So what does it mean to be a man from a prophetic perspective? Because there's toxic masculinity, which is something you always hear about, right? So, well, what is the perspective of prophetic masculinity? And one of the leading causes of a lot of divorce today is a lot of young men weren't raised to be men. They were raised as just males. And you say, well, what does that mean? So they're adult boys. So their whole life, their mom has cooked for them, cleaned for them, do this, do that. They haven't learned responsibility. When in our Sharia, there was a very clear mandate that, for example, my daughter, from the date she's born, inshallah, may Allah give me the life to continue her education and sustain her. And for all of you, your future children, inshallah, from the date she's born till the day she dies, she isn't responsible for earning an income for herself. I don't mean she's not allowed. I mean she's not responsible for her self-maintenance. So from her father's household, if Allah, limits my qadar in life, then she would go to her brothers or her uncles or my father or my brothers. She would go in terms of that maintenance to all of those who are men who are meant to be supporters of every woman in their lifetime. And that's where you hear that hadith of the Prophet saying, before the end of judgment, there will be one man for every 50 women. قائم عليها, meaning it's not that he's marrying or he's responsible for the maintenance of 50 women. That's just what it's going to be. So in that regard, you find that in our Sharia, when she gets married, the guardianship of being looked after goes from her to somebody else, to her husband. And if there's divorce, la qaddar Allah, she will come back towards her father or her brothers or her sisters or whoever until the day of her death. But the son is different. In our Sharia, from the moment you attain at an age of rushd and bulugh, that you become physically, intellectually responsible, your father, your mother do not owe you any maintenance. They don't have to clothe you, feed you, shelter you. Now, how many 16, 18, 19-year-old young men today in our society have been brought up to be self-reliant by that age? Not just self-reliant, but reliant enough upon themselves and their abilities that they can sustain people in their households who aren't responsible for looking after their financial affairs, who aren't obligated to spend on their housing and shelter and food like their sister or their mother or their aunt and so on.
It's a subhanAllah, it kind of makes you reflect that we seem to just go about society and just do what society tells us in regards to even how to be a man, which is kind of scary, right?
So parents have raised their sons the way they raise their daughters, but it's not meant to be that way. You're supposed to raise your son to be a provider, a moneymaker, an educator, courageous, patient, steadfast, the one who stands so others can sit. Those kind of things. We have those kind of thoughts. If you're on a bus and somebody gets on, you're the first one you're supposed to stand and let them sit. Those kind of traits are quickly dying off, not just in Western culture, but even amongst us as Muslims, right? So those are really, really important things for us to reconnect with. And that's why Umar radiallahu anhu, he has this statement we've all memorized, but Mistakenly, it's usually narrated that the Prophet said. It's not the word of the Prophet. It's from Umar, where he said, "Allimu awladakum as-sibaha." Teach your young men, your children, to learn how to swim. Now, you'd say, why is a man landlocked in the desert in Medina speaking on Friday, telling people to teach them to swim? Because he had the foresight to say to them that what is going to come in the future is not what you've experienced. You're riding on camels, but your children are going to be riding on ships to other places. And that's all part of that psychology of raising our children. It's something that's important for us to consider, that always Allah speaks about men as being different to males. Ar-rijal, they have characteristics, qualifications. Rijalun sadaqu ma'ahadullah. Men are those who are truthful in their promise to Allah. Ar-rijal qawwamun ala nisa. True men are those who are at the responsibility of looking after all of the women in their life. Rijalun la tulhihim tijara. Men are those who aren't distracted by commerce and business and trade and education from the worship of Allah. Those are characteristics of men.
I think in terms of males needing to be the money maker, financially sustainable on their own right, people will say that look, just a scenario that the West, in Sydney specifically, house prices are pretty high. It's tough for males to make an income, to provide and also buy a house potentially, or even rent potentially, because prices are so high and groceries and all that. So it's tough for a guy. So that's where the females got to help out the males, and feminism, and got to get jobs, and that's why the females need to have a role in the finances. That kind of
look, that's something the Prophet prophesied would happen. He said the day of judgment will not arrive حتى تعين المرأة, until the woman will need to help her husband out in the marketplace. The Prophet said that would happen. And we have the Quranic construct of Musa alayhi salam in Surah Al-Qasas coming out of the desert and seeing two women who were forced to be shepherds because their father, Shaykhun Kabir, was an elderly and a notable man in their community. He didn't have sons. They had to do that work. So as long as they maintained the right, جاءت إحداهما على استحياء, they had hayat, they had modesty, they didn't mix with the men. لا نسقي حتى يصدر الرعاء. We're not going to mix with all these men who are also seeking to water their flock. So where the ethics are established is the Quranic construct. But is there a mandate for women to work? Of course, there's nothing wrong with that if it's done in the same way that is ethical, which is also the same boundaries for men in that which is ethical. So a job that you can take is a job that she can take if it's done in the way that is accepted in our deen, in the construct of what is halal and what is haram. Right? Because
in saying that, like, when we're faced with our reality in the society that we live, it sort of blurs the role of the male and the female, if that makes sense. So I guess that's where the confusion arises.
Well, it depends what you mean by role.
Role in the sense that we already expected men to be the providers and protect the family.
But that's not an expectation. That's a Quranic and Sunnah demand. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an." Everyone is responsible for something, and everyone's responsible before Allah. فَالرَّجُلُ, a man, is mas'ulun an ra'i, is responsible for his wife, for his children. That's what Allah has determined. So my wife can give me zakah, I can't give her zakah. I want you to think about that. So a woman comes to the Prophet ﷺ, she says, "Look, my husband ﷺ is going through a tough financial time. I've been blessed with my wealth. I have a little bit of savings. O Messenger of Allah, can I give him zakah? Can it count towards my zakah? Or should I just give him money because we're having financial difficulty?" The Prophet says, yes, you can give him zakah. A husband can't give his wife zakah because she's your wife. It's a different level of compliance. So we have to come to terms with what does it mean, and that's why the Prophet would not allow people to get married if they weren't financially able. So in the authentic hadith, the Prophet says, "Man istata'a minkum al-ba'a," in the hadith of Imam Tirmidhi, the one who is able to fulfill the responsibility, فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ, they should get married as soon as possible. The one who can't should fast and should hold themselves to a higher spiritual regard until Allah makes it easier for them.
wouldn't people say, some people say, look, marriage, there's a hadith about the barakah that you get after the marriage. So even if you're, struggling, just get married, inshallah.
No, it's haram to get married without the ability to get married.
I think
so marriage could be halal, marriage could be haram, marriage could be makruh, marriage can be mustahab, and marriage can be wajib for
I think he referred to, I think it was an ayah or a hadith where Allah says that يُغْنِيهِمُ اللَّهُ مِنْ فَضْلِهِ, that Allah will enrich you even if you don't have sufficient means. I don't know, more or less.
So it doesn't mean get married without the means. Why did people come to Umar radiallahu anhu and ask that zakah be distributed to those who are seeking to get married? Because you can't get married unless you have the means to get married. So at the very least, those kind of statements and those kind of verses were very contextualized to very poverty-stricken days of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Such as the hadith of in Sahih al-Bukhari, where the woman got married for the verses of the Quran that she would be taught. So comes a new woman who's made hijrah. She's homeless. She's got nothing, no one. And the only person she could turn to, she comes to the Messenger of Allah. She says, "O Messenger of Allah, I've come made hijrah to you. I have nobody here. Would you marry me?" It's like a social, would you look after me? So the Prophet ﷺ said, "No, I'm not mandated to marry you. There's no instruction from Allah to do that." So she says, "Can you find someone who can?" I have nobody. So the Prophet ﷺ puts offer, and there's nobody who has anything except one man. And he puts his hand up, and the Prophet says, "Do you have anything that you can sustain her with?" And the man says, "No." Prophet says, "You don't even have a ring of silver?" He says, "Not even a ring of silver. Not even a ring of iron?" He goes, "Not even a ring of iron, O Messenger of Allah." So the Prophet says, "Well, what do you have? How are you going to get married?" The man says, "O Messenger of Allah sallallahu, I have Al-Baqarah wa Al-Imran. I have knowledge in those two things." Now this is at a time where there is nothing, nobody has anything. So the Prophet says, "I put you in marriage because it's better to have those two people who are dysfunctionally homeless together than that they're homeless separate."
Right.
So it's not a rule for us that we allow people to get married unprepared, because that's dhulm.
Right.
It would be even considered criminal behavior if somebody gets married on false pretense, where they get married that the person assumes that they can take care of them, but they can't. And now, sometimes people go a little bit too far in this, where they think take care of them means to buy them the house. I'm not saying you have to buy the house,
like
or
the
that you have to live in
of.
a particular. And that's why the aqd of marriage is very important. Once we learn what it means to have a contract of marriage, you find it's very much a business agreement. So your wife beforehand can say, "Listen, I want to live near my mom." And you say, "But I can't afford that suburb." She says, "But that's what I want." So if you can't afford that suburb, then you can't get married to me. It's as simple as that. This is what I need for, I want to be able to work, or I want to be able to stay home and not work and raise the children. But I need to have this level of lifestyle. So those are all things that should be very meaningful in the discussion beforehand. And that's why the aqd is very, very important.
For sure.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. I think even in terms of... I feel that just to steer the conversation more towards, I guess, the responsibility of male, and maybe they may abuse parts of the Sharia in order to fulfill some nafsi desire. Like I feel that it's a bad example, but I was looking into the whole. There was this. I don't know if you're familiar with R. Kelly, the rapper.
Not really.
Okay.
But okay.
Anyway,
go with it. We'll go with it.
So
is that what they do in the cave?
We do all our research.
Okay. Inshallah.
So he, what happened was, he got done for a lot of bad things. But I want to focus more on what he did was he abused a lot of women. So he would lure younger women and do a lot of haram stuff. But I saw some of the testimonies from the women, because they were initially fans with him, fans with for his music and all that. But one thing they said is the manipulation that kind of happened in regards to the relationship with R. Kelly, in the sense that he, like, for example, like, "Oh, if you love me, you'd do this." Like it's very subtle, or even you wouldn't see if you really love me, you'd stay in the house, or stuff like that. So it starts very piece by piece until the point where
which are levels of abuse,
emotional,
of course.
abuse kind of occurs.
Absolutely.
And it started like he went to a crazy extreme. He started doing like crazy bad stuff, but it kind of made me reflect that on a normal day-to-day kind of level, people do it probably not to the extreme that he did it, but they still do it to manipulate maybe even the children, the wife, to do certain ways, like even using Islam
or the husband as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be good to get your thoughts. Like, do you think this is, maybe widespread or maybe not as widespread? And do we tend to kind of abuse Islam? Like, for example, there's a famous, people would know the hadith about, women have to obey the man. And, the men kind of pull it up whenever they kind of want something from the female in a perhaps
well, that's a really bad translation. So I'll probably start with that. So the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he speaks about, for example, one narration: if a woman was to pray her 5 prayers, fast her month of Ramadan, and the translation that, of course, that I disagree with, and obey her husband, it'll be said to her, enter paradise from whichever gate. The correct translation is, and devotes her life to her husband. Now, it means a totally different thing than the word obey in the English language. But the English word obey is not the same as the word in Arabic ta'ah, although it's used by Allah and His Messenger. So Allah says, "Ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul." No Muslim would ever assume the obedience of Allah and the Messenger is the same context as the Prophet saying, "Ata'at zawjaha," that a wife devotes herself to her husband. Because the devotion to Allah and His Messenger is absolute, but the obedience of Allah and His Messenger is absolute, while the devotion of a wife to her husband is conditional. So the concept of ta'ah is mu'allala bis-salahiyya. It is conditional on the effective cause of it being valid. So if I was to come home and say to my wife, stand on one leg, hop, and bark, there's no obedience. What are you talking about? If I was to say to my wife, get up and make me a cup of tea, and she goes, say please, like why are you speaking to me like this? And I say, what do you mean? Allah said that you have to obey me. That's not what Allah or the Prophet ﷺ demanded. So what is demanded is that she is devoted to him in her habit of life. So the Prophet discusses in other places. إِذَا غَابَ عَنْهَا حَصِنَتْ. If he's away from her in travel, she protects his reputation and name. She doesn't do something when he's not present that would dishonor him. She wouldn't let people into the home and people say, hey, he left on a trip and all of a sudden she's getting all these people in and out. She wouldn't do something that is, all of a sudden he turns his eye and she spends all the money, or those kind of things that would be dishonoring. That's a very different concept to what you find by abusive men who pull out a statement that is falsely translated or falsely understood, uncontextualized. So in our deen, we don't have a woman obey her husband as in obey the way you and I obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unconditionally, right? So that's important to be clarified.
Because I think just in terms of obedience, you clarified that point, but just for our modern context, it's social media is, it's gonna screw up a whole lot of relationships.
Well, there was different media at the time of the Prophet. There were poets. In fact, social media today pales in comparison to what was at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The poets. If you read the pre-Islamic poetry of Majnoon and Layla, they called him Majnoon. He was so crazy with his love for Layla. He would rock the tent with her and, all this kind of really, it's like, whoa, makes you blush. And that was the norm. So most people, they decontextualize what Medina was like, what Mecca was like at the time of the Prophet, that it was much more adulterous, much more nude than what you and I have today in Sydney.
Really?
Wow.
I
Absolutely.
think,
I've said that many times.
When people walk into Mecca to make Umrah, they would take off all their clothes and go around the Kaaba naked.
Yeah,
that was
true.
Umrah for the. When people, when you got married in that time, you didn't marry a man, you married the tribe. So his father had rights to you, his uncle had rights to you, his sons from other women had rights to you, and you'd be inherited in that regard. But that wasn't just Arabia. That was like the Romans and the Greeks.
Yeah, true.
Women didn't have the right to own property, and Islam came and emancipated, and that's why Islam was very very forward thinking in a lot of its policies and a lot of its.
Some people say, I've also kind of agreed with them, like a lot of entrepreneurs and business people say that social media isn't changing us, it's just exposing us, in the sense that
it does expose you.
Like maybe 20, 30 years ago, the same sort of conversations we have online, it would have been happening, but if we didn't have social media, it would probably be happening at the corner store with a group of friends.
And at the pub or, amongst a circle of people sitting in a train or on
an Islamic event in Bankstown doing a podcast.
And like
it's just
I guess there'll be other mediums that people use in order to show off, their ego perhaps, or even show off in general.
I think there's a book that I wrote. It's called Love Stories of the Quran. Now, most people, they understand love stories like it's all positive love. There's a lot of love stories in the Quran that are condemnable. So if you want to talk about like gossip, the women who talked about Yusuf and that lady, if you want to talk about desirous love, shaghafaha hubba, she was so crazy with love, she was going to dishonor her husband. She locked up all the doors. She attacked her servant. That's like abuse of everything you're talking about, right? That's R. Kelly. I don't know R. Kelly, but in reverse. You have the Prophet ﷺ saying of the 7 who will be sheltered on the day of judgment when other people seek it is a man who resisted the allure of a woman who's above him in wealth and beauty, who calls him to herself and he says, I fear Allah. Right? Don't think that these are things that are new to our context or time. These are timeless stories. Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam is condemned in the Quran for his love of, condemns himself, for his love of the fineries. قال إني أحببت حب الخير عن ذكر ربي. He almost missed the prayer because he was enjoying the company of his stallions and his horses. He was riding them, and Salat al-Asr came to an end and he's about to miss the prayer. So he ordered, ردوها علي, take these horses. I never want to see them again. Like he makes a deterrent for himself from ever making that sin again. Prophet Dawood alayhi salam, Allah, if you go back to the book and if you go to that series of lectures that I've done about love stories, Prophet Dawood saw the beauty of a woman and he asked about her, who is she? And they said, she's betrothed to your general who's on the frontiers. And for a moment in his heart, he thought, well, subhanAllah, if Allah gives him shahada, then maybe I can ask for her hand. Of course, the narrative in the Bible is that he sent assassins to kill his general, which is fraud, for us as Muslims is unacceptable. But Prophet Dawood, it was a moment of being tested by Allah. So Allah sent him 2 angels in the form of men, and Allah relates this in Surah Sad. فَتَصَوَّرَ الْمِحْرَابِ. They climbed over into his sanctuary and they said, we are 2 brethren in friendship. My brother, he has 99 sheep and I have 1 sheep.
Yeah.
And he keeps asking me for his 1 sheep. And he is so blessed with so many other things. And Dawood said, he shouldn't force you to give your 1 sheep. فَظَنَّ دَاوُودَ أَنَّ فَتَنَّاهُ. Dawood understood. He's the guy with 99 sheep. You have so many blessings and you were thinking about that 1 sheep, that one, your friend, that general, had that 1 sheep. And even though in your heart it was a movement, you never did anything wrong. Ya Dawood, inna ja'alnaka khalifatan fil ard fahkum bayna an-nas. We've made you someone who is inherited and pass on this governance to others. وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَى. Don't follow desire. It's a very serious discussion. So it's important not to decontextualize the experiences that we have today as being detached from the Quranic narrative, because it's all there.
MashaAllah. I think, what's your take on, I think a lot of people tend to look at like rulings and follow it, which is very important, but they tend to forget about the spiritual side of things when it comes to perhaps embodying as a husband in the family, embodying the Muslim ideals or Islamic principles on a more spiritual level, rather than just following it on a physical kind of level, if that makes sense.
I think one of the most damning things for our community of Muslims, not just in Australia but in different parts of the world, is that we don't support each other to that which is good. And once again, don't decontextualize it from what happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So in the authentic hadith in Bukhari, Salman al-Farisi, he goes to visit his brother Abu Darda, radiallahu anhu arda, who was a master in spirituality. And he comes and he, by chance, he encounters the wife of Abu Darda. And he says, how's everything? How's my brother Abu Darda? And why are you so unkept? She wasn't, she looked like she was just
A hobo.
downtrodden. Yeah, downtrodden. Radiallahu anha wa ardaha. Wa radiallahu an as-sahabati ajma'een. So she said, well, I'm married to a man whose only concern is Allah and has forgotten about. So why do I need to take those measures? So he said, what do you mean? She said, he is a person who fasts every day, prays every night, and eats very, very little. He only has time for Allah. So Salman hears this about this imbalance, and he says, no, I'm going to fix this. So he goes to Abu Darda. He says, I'm going to stay at your house tonight. Abu Darda goes, you're welcome. So the food was brought, and he said, Abu Darda took 2 bites and stopped eating. He said, no, eat. And he goes, no, this is all. He goes, no, eat. Inna li badanika alayka haqq. Your body has a right over you. You must nourish it. You're frail. What's wrong with you? And then Abu Darda goes, okay, let's go to sleep. You go to sleep. I'm going to start my prayer. He goes, no. You go in, comfort yourself and your wife. Your family. Inna li ahlika alayka haqq. Right? And then he makes him stay there until the last third of the night. And then he says, okay, inna li rabbi. Your Lord also has a right. Let's get up and pray. So that intervention is very rare.
SubhanAllah.
Who cares for their brother in a way like that? Sometimes we see our brother, he's lost his job, is struggling. We don't even ask, is everything okay, akhi? Do you need a loan? We're so taken up by, well, it could happen to me. I better keep my savings. I can't extend myself. We have these kind of false narratives of what it means to be a good person. And I'll close this section by saying there's a very big difference between being a good person, being salih, and being muslih. So salih, I'm righteous, alhamdulillah, salih. But that's not what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be muslih. And muslih is someone who helps others become salih.
Wow, that's deep.
You can be as good as you are, but you're not effective. You're not a person who follows the life of the Prophet ﷺ. An takuna min al-muslihin, to be from those. Everybody likes you when you're a good person. People begin to turn away from you when you're trying to lead people to them being good people. That's where they turned against the Prophet. Everybody saw him as the truthful one, the righteous one, the trustworthy one, until he said to them, hey, how about you become more truthful? They're like, hey, what do you mean? You're a Rasul. Hey, you stay over there. You leave us alone. We're going to live the way we want to live. Right? That's important.
I think even that reminds me of the idea of Islam not falling into extremes, because there can always be one or the other. So one is maybe not doing enough prayers, or just not doing the fard prayers. But then there's the other extreme where you're doing everything you're doing on top of what you should be doing, but then neglecting obviously it is Islamic, but just on a human level, like, taking care of the family, all these things might get neglected because you're too fixated too much on perhaps doing like prayers and all that. And it's about hitting that middle ground for everything in life.
Absolutely.
Even with you'll be able to articulate better than me, but there was that person who came to Rasulullah and said, I'd fast every day, but it's better to do the fast of Dawood alayhi salam. Even like that shows like Islam's not necessarily about, like, I've always found that Islam hits that middle ground very nicely about every other every
the
issue.
middle road.
And I think that's what
wasata, the ummah of the middle course.
SubhanAllah.
In everything. جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. I've made you an ummah that is rightfully balanced. That you don't go right or left, too far this way or that way.
And that's like, for me personally, I use that sort of as a compass in my life to see, am I going too far on one extreme or going too far on another extreme, and is it Islamic?
And the key is to have people who can mentor you in that process, because sometimes it's not self-indicative.
That's true, yeah.
And that's the second part of our failing as a community, that we don't mentor through scholarship that is a natural scholarship. See, people now, they want to learn, but they want to learn quickly. So there's the weekend courses, and there's the one-day conferences, and then there's the
those are my favorite.
Not even that. Not even the YouTube. If I was to put up a video on my YouTube channel and it's 40 minutes, it doesn't get as many views as a 3-minute YouTube clip. That's just how it is. And if the YouTube clip doesn't have like cinematic and that
the
in the back. People
nasheed
don't
music,
the nasheed in the background. It's not as attractive because we've been bred to have instantaneous gratification, but that was never the aim of our faith. Everything in the 5 pillars of Islam is about delayed gratification. You're saying La ilaha illallah, it means you're going to choose the akhirah, not the dunya. You say salah, you don't get anything at salam alaikum, salam alaikum. You don't see any merit until the day of judgment. Siyam, you got to be hungry until the end of the day. Zakah, you're giving your wealth that you earned to somebody who you don't even know. Hajj, you got to endure with patience to delay that gratification and find its reward and light with Allah. And that's interwoven in the 5 pillars of our faith to teach us that وَلَدَارُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ, the life to come, that is where the goodness is. Even the word akhirah, the next choice or the hereafter, comes from the word khayr. Can you hear it? Akhirah and khayr. Khayr means good. Akhirah means where the good actually is because you've delayed waiting to achieve it. And that's very much in tune with a lot of modern psychological assessments about delayed gratification, being able to hold on and so on.
Yeah, in psychology, there was this experiment where they got a bunch of, I think, children, very young.
The marshmallow test.
Yeah, the marshmallow test. So that kind of, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's they've tested that the most successful children were later in life were the ones that didn't want to have the marshmallow that was put in front of them straight away when they were told that you'd get even more marshmallows if you didn't eat the one in front of you right now.
And the only flaw with that particular assessment is that it's natural for children who come from deprived backgrounds to want to have it instantaneously because they've been taught, if I don't get it now, I won't get it later.
So that's true.
So there's a skewed, so a lot of people, if you come from a poor socioeconomic background and you do that test with your child, they're going to fail, not because they won't be successful, but because they don't have. So they're always competing with their brothers and their sisters, and you don't bring the good things home enough that I got to get it.
Do you think that means that the environment sort of shapes your... Obviously, Allah will be merciful in understanding that you're going through certain environments and situations, but our mindset should be sort of a more delayed gratification type approach.
Absolutely. It should be to isbiru wa sabiru. The word sabr means delayed gratification. That's the correct translation.
I think this even
to wait for that which will give you greater success, that which will make it better. If you hold on, لَإِن صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. If you were to be patient and endure, it'll be better in the later stage.
I think this even ties in with why pornography is rife. It's just instantaneous gratification. You can get that high straight away, and and this whole society of consumerism, everything is literally based on instant gratification. Even marketing
it's
tactics.
Not just here. It's not just Western society. It's,
definitely.
The same flaws are in all different cultures in different ways, but they're expressed in the same very similar kind of processes.
And some people say that some people who are more, I guess, spiritually inclined but may not be Muslim will understand that instant gratification isn't good, but they're looking from a more self-serving perspective, where they say that if you delay your gratification, you'll be more content on a long run. So they see it as a self-serving purpose, even though they're not having a self-serving gratification type of approach. Do you see that? Would that approach be problematic? Because from an Islamic perspective as well, can we look at from that lens as well, or should we always look from the lens of do everything for the sake of Allah and not be tied down by your nafs?
Well, what does the word sake of Allah mean? So that's a really, so if I stand up to pray because my father said, Yahya, get up and pray, it's for the sake of Allah, but it was due to being prompted, right? And so where does that line come? It's in the depth of your heart and through your training. And that's why the more you pray, the better you get at praying. The more you fast, the better you get at fasting. The more you give, the better you give. So one of the ways that I like to explain this is explaining the word birr. usually righteousness. Allah says in the Quran, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ, you won't attain righteousness. You won't be a person of birr, which is like birrul walidain, righteous to your parents. It's such a difficult thing. لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا, until you give from the things you love. The word birr in Arabic, just as a linguistic, it means something that is blooming in the desert that has no reason to be there. So it's, you're walking in the middle of the desert and there's a rose. You're like, what's this doing here? Because it's so rare. It's very rare that a person will give from their time, give from their wealth, selflessly for the betterment of others. It's very difficult for a son to be good to his father and mother in their old age without saying, oof.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's such a massive ascent. It's like climbing Everest towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So being a person of righteousness requires patience and endurance. Al-Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, it's more difficult to do what Allah has obligated than it is to stay away from what Allah has forbidden, and that it is to be patient when Allah tests us in life. The most difficult challenge will be to be consistent with your Fajr prayer each and every day for the rest of your life. إنها لكبيرة, Allah describes it is an enormity, إلا على الخاشعين, except for those who eventually develop humility in their prayer, which is through extra regularity of their salah.
I wanted to hone in on a specific example. We talked about perhaps environment shaping our actions with the marshmallow example that we discussed. You know how there are perhaps families, let's say there's a Muslim family, and because obviously as parents should be great to the child and children should be great to the parents, and we already know Islamically, we already have a basic idea of how a parent should act towards the child, and how respectful the child should be towards the parents. However, sometimes the dynamics of the family is that there's a lot of arguing going on. Maybe there's the husband and wife have issues, and it kind of trickles down towards the kids, and perhaps behaviors by the kids are shaped by what they've seen by their parents the whole time, which is just a rocky relationship between the husband and the wife. And that has an effect on a psychological level with the kids. But then at the same time, sometimes the kids may not necessarily go out of their way to disrespect their parents, but at the same time they pick up certain, like for example, how the husband and wife may argue among each other.
Speak to each other.
Maybe sometimes when the husband or the wife speak to the kids in a certain way, and the kids kind of respond back in a similar way they've been seeing their whole life, if that makes sense. And I think it does happen on a psychological level. I would like to get your thoughts, because a lot of people will say that, some parents in that situation, when they have such a situation, the family will go to a khutbah with their kids and be like, look, they said you got to obey the father, and you don't do XYZ. But the kid isn't necessarily going out of his way to create hostility towards the parents. It's just picked up psychologically. So there's a lot of things to unpack, but it's just like a scenario that I felt that perhaps a lot of Muslim families go through, simply because living in the West, when you have first generation parents living here and the kids are grown up here, so the kids the parents may not understand exactly what the kids are going for. There's like a disconnect between the parents and the kids. So how would you say that, let's just say it's the child's perspective, would you say they have a more responsibility to perhaps change the status quo and maybe realize that the dynamics of the family is in such a way that they should, even though they may be unfairly be treated at times, they still have to exercise like immense patience, and what's the steps that one should take in such an environment?
So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء إلا من ظلم. Allah has no love for the one who uses abusive words except at a moment where they've experienced dhulm. So there's always instances. So the Prophet ﷺ لم يكن سبا ولا لعانا. He wasn't a person who would use vulgarity or even listen to it or allow it to be spoken in front of him. But here you find this Quranic narrative where Allah shows that there will be moments in your life where you are put under stress and trauma and a mental kind of difficulty that you lost kind of control and judgment. But the essence is that you shouldn't even make a sound of dislike, which is al-awla, so if I shouldn't say oof, then how dare I say, a vulgarity or a bad word. The second thing that's important is, yes, absolutely, we absorb our socialization and the environment that we grew up in and that we learn. Science is now coming to show that even genetically, children who were born to parents who had those traits, who never got to raise them, they demonstrate those same traits, and it's passed down genetically. It's really, powerful kind of stuff that we're beginning to see, that there are things that within our genes that are passed down in that regard. And that is very consistent to the word of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, "An-nasu ma'adin," men and women are like minerals. Some are dirt, some are gold, some are silver. There are different types and different qualities of human beings. The Prophet characterizes us as also being like camels. Out of every 100 camels, there's only one that's good to be used, right? You have to be, shop around to find the right one. So that shows us that there is this understanding that we are shaped by the world that we've experienced and the world that we live in, but that doesn't absolve us from what it is that Allah seeks from us, even though on the Day of Judgment, Allah might excuse us for it. And that's why as a part of the Aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah that we believe Allah will forgive people who haven't made tawbah, except for shirk. That's the only one that's not forgivable without you removing yourself from it. So if a person is a mushrik, they have no hope of Allah forgiving them unless they've actually stopped their shirk. But وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ, Allah can forgive all other sins that are other than that, even if the person hasn't repented particularly for it, because Allah knows the context and the circumstance and the reason and the rationale behind it that was given to them as a qadar. Allah's not going to hold a child who was abused by his parents growing up, struck and yelled at and cut and burned and so on, and say, why in your older age you haven't spoken to your mom? Well, because my mom was an abusive person. Allah's not going to hold that person to the same regard and account as somebody who had a wonderful mother who nurtured them in their life. So this is something that's important, and sometimes it's not contextualized that way in the quick Jumu'ah prayers where the Imam is saying, be good to your mom, be good to your dad, Jannah's under their feet, they're the door to Jannah. No, that requires a contextualization as well. In general, we know that Allah's contentment is in the contentment of our parents in accordance to al-ma'ruf, in accordance to that which is equitable between us. So if I had a wretched home life, what I must provide my father and mother will not be the same as somebody who had a blessed and easy home life. There are two different standards. For example, it might be that all I can muster is that I give my dad a call or my mom a call on Eid. That's it. Nothing else. For somebody else, no, they live with me. They raise me, kama rabbayana sighara, as they raise me, I'm going to look after them. Well, what if I wasn't looked after when I was young? I don't want to see them. I don't want to talk to them again. So then you do what you are able to do and push yourself to that level of patience to do more than you feel that you're doing as the days go by.
SubhanAllah. I think we're nearing the end of the episode.
Yes,
but
I was about to prompt you with that actually.
But do you have one more question? I do have one last question to ask the Shaykh.
No, go ahead. We didn't really talk much about spirituality, but it's fine.
No, alhamdulillah.
It's all about family. It's so good.
So,
which is the essence of spirituality, right?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. But the last question I'm going to ask is a question that we asked all our guests that come on Boys in the Cave. Alhamdulillah, we're, I think, 50 plus episodes. So this is the hardest question of the day.
Brace myself.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay.
A lot of people been stumped. I've got people that had to pause the podcast for like 5 minutes to kind of come up with an answer because I'll go ahead with the question. So if you had to chill with 3 people in a cave, because Boys in the Cave, and they can't be Rasulullah or the Sahaba, or maybe even the early generation Sahaba, because they will assume they're already in the cave for adab's sake, but you have to bring in 3 other people in history that perhaps influenced you. It could be someone that's living now or in the past. Who would they be to have a conversation with?
That's easy. So my father,
SubhanAllah.
my Shaykh Muhammad Safwat Nuruddin, may Allah have mercy upon him, and my grandfather, my father's father, who was one of my main teachers as well.
SubhanAllah.
That's very easy. That's not a... That's a very easy
Mashallah.
question. Yeah.
To be honest,
I think
I
there
had,
was only one
Allah
other
join
person who
us
just said it like
with
that.
them in Jannah. May Allah give my
Ameen.
father a good long life. Allahumma
Ameen.
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 Mom, if you're listening, you too. But they said only 3. So I love you, Mom. But you and Dad together anyway. You're
Alhamdulillah.
always together.
I've had guests like they give responses.
My wife is gonna kill me, by the way.
Yeah, I've had the one guest said the same thing
Yeah.
because they forgot the wife and we brought it up because another.
No. Yeah. And my wife's cool, man. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah,
She's
but
with me wherever I am anyway. So yeah, it makes no difference.
subhanallah,
Mm.
but alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair for coming on Boys in the Cave. It was a really unique discussion. I don't think we've touched on family and dynamics to this degree on the podcast, and it's always a much needed discussion because we all have families, some sort of family, and we need to be the
Alhamdulillah.
best in Muslims.
Well, look, as I said, it's the basis of that book, Love Stories from the Quran. It's about the family discussions that are in the Quran. So it might be a good reference for you, inshallah.
Definitely. So we'll throw all
Inshallah.
the links in our show notes, inshallah, and even the YouTube page and
No
your
problem,
socials.
inshallah, khair,
People
yeah.
can check it out, inshallah. So inshallah, I'm looking forward to connecting in the future as well,
Ameen.
if you come down. But jazakallah khair. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook. You can follow our journey through Instagram. Alhamdulillah, we're making good progress in terms of increase of all our followers on all social medias. Inshallah, keep supporting us. We're trying to bring a unique way of having discussion and dialogue, especially with how modern society is heading towards a way of having discussions on more podcast formats or anything to do with social media. We're trying to do that from our end as much as you see. Maybe for the people who are seeing it through live, we're doing the best we can. So please support us if you want to get in Sadaqa Jariyah. Head over to patreon.com/boysinthecave. Shaykh, you don't have to stick around. You can probably head off.
Allah
I want to do the
yabarak
sign
feek.
off, but we appreciate it.
Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Sorry, I just have a
Yeah, you have to head
seminar
off.
thing
Sure.
that I'm going. Assalamu alaikum wa
Wa
rahmatullah.
alaikum assalam.
Assalamu wa rahmatullah.
Allah yabarak feekum. Jazakumullah khair. It was a pleasure, honor. Shukran.
Jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullahu khairan.
We'll connect soon, inshallah. But for the audience, as I was talking about, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring having this different type of discussion to the table using a unique medium, and we feel that with our content that we put up online, and maybe Rami, you could probably give your thoughts as well, how every piece of knowledge or information that is put on through our platform, be it through social media, through YouTube, through podcast platform, every piece of information, inshallah, we make the internet stays alive. It doesn't have some mass destruction or something, but in 20 years, 100 million years, or 1,000 years, as long as the internet lives, this content will always be up there, right?
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
So you can
We
see
just
like
gotta
the amount
keep
of
riding the wave and
and
keep
there's
putting
like a hadith where every piece of knowledge, if you facilitate knowledge and it sticks by, it's actually like Sadaqa Jariyah, so
Yeah,
you're getting
yeah.
rewards till the day of judgment.
There was
So
the hadith that 3 types of deeds continue after you pass away. So it's Sadaqah Jariyah is one of them, a righteous child that makes dua for you.
So exactly. So we're trying to do that from the best of our ability. So please head over to patreon.com/boysinthecave. It's rewards for you, and you can benefit us. We do want to make it sustainable, and we do want to improve our. We're trying to aim towards perhaps a studio. It doesn't have to be anything too fancy, but just a space that we can always go to, because that's one of the things that we're working towards, inshallah. So Sheikh's left, but from our special guest Shaykh Ibrahim and Rahmat and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. You can probably hear babies crying in the background. Alhamdulillah, but may Allah bless everyone. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know what the Prophet also said about babies crying during prayer? Got to hasten the prayer, so got to hasten the podcast now.